I'm Alison from Bag Lady Bird Learn to Sew. Today's video is about 10 top tips to get more from your sewing machine. So this originally started life as a blog post when I first set up my business. So it's a relatively old post that I'm now going to talk you through and give you some more information about. When it was originally written as a blog post, it was known as 10 top tips to get to know your sewing machine. So that's why each of the images has that at the top of it. I've now remade it as a video and I will talk you through it step by step. But every time I share this blog, I get such a lot of feedback from people saying that there are some tips in there that they didn't know, and these tips just help make your stitching better, help make you a better sewer, and just improve the quality of your work. So without further ado, tip number 1, only turn the hand wheel forward. So to always turn the top towards you. Turning it in the opposite direction can cause your threads to get tangled or to snap. You'll often feel some tension if you try to turn it backwards. So keep the hand wheel turning forwards. Tip number 2, when putting your thread onto the machine, always make sure that your thread is coming off the spool in the right direction. So what that means is if your machine has spools that lie flat, the thread should come from underneath towards you. And if your machine has an upright spool or upright spool pins, any writing on the spool should be the right way up, and the thread should be coming around the front towards the tension. So the reason for doing this is that when your thread is coming off the spool, it's coming off at speed, and if it's coming off in the wrong direction, what can happen is the twists of the twine of the thread can untwist in the wrong direction and open up the individual fibres of the thread. So if you make sure that the thread is coming off the spool in the correct direction, that will minimise the risk of that happening, and it'll mean your thread is twisted correctly. Top tip number 3 is use the correct needle for your fabric. So your type of fabric will determine what sort of needle you need to use. So if you're using a jersey fabric or a knitted fabric, you'll want to use a jersey, a stretch or a ballpoint needle. If you're using a woven fabric, there are different types of needles that you may need to use. So universal is the most commonly used one. Then you have things like microtex needles, which are super sharp, denim needles, which are a bit more heavy duty, and top stitching needles, which have a bit bigger eye. So first of all, use the correct needle for the type of project you're working on, and then use the correct size of needle for the weight of the fabric. So a size 80 or 12 needle would be correct for a medium weight fabric. If you're going lighter, then you want to go smaller numbers. So the finer your fabric, the smaller the number on the size of the needle, and the higher the number, the thicker the fabric, the heavier the fabric, the higher the number on your needle. So there are 2 different scales. One is American and one is European, and one goes sort of from 65 to 110, and the other one will go from 7 to 16, 18, something like that. And they're just 2 different scales, but they work the same way in that the smaller the number, the smaller the needle, the finer the needle. And the bigger the number, the bigger the needle. So I always make sure I've got a stash of good quality needles to hand, of different varieties and different types. I'll make sure that I've got them so I'm not looking about for having to order them for a new project. Tip number 4, remove your thread from the machine by unthreading your needle first and then cutting the thread at the top near the spool and pulling the thread from the bottom. If you whip your thread out from the top, it can upset the tension discs, it can pull fluff into the tension discs, it can just create problems that you don't really want to have. So always try and cut from the top and then remove the thread from the bottom. Tip number 5, understand your machine dials. Read your manual to find out what each one of them does. This machine is the Janome 525S, and on this particular machine, number 1 is your tension dial, number 2 is the needle position or stitch width, number 3 is your stitch selection, and number 4 is the stitch length. They may be different on your machine, but check with your manual to find out. Tip 6. If you're having tension issues, thread the top and the bottom in different colours so you can more clearly identify the issue. If your thread is bunching up under your fabric, it's an issue with your top threading. If the thread is bunching up on top of your fabric, it's an issue with your bobbin. And also, please note that 9 times out of 10, when you have issues with your stitches, it's nothing to do with your tension. It's more likely to be incorrect threading of either your top thread or your bobbin or needle issues. So check those things first before you start messing about with your tension dial. Tip number 7, change your needle regularly. You'll knot so well with a blunt needle. It is recommended that you change your needle after 8 hours of sewing, but I tend to change it at the start of every new project. Tip number 8. Use the seam guides on the machine base to keep your sewing straight. Your pattern should tell you what seam allowance to use, and find the guideline that corresponds with that and keep the raw edges of the fabric level with that line. Keep your eye on the guideline rather than your needle to keep you straight. Top tip 9. Play about with the different stitches so that you know what your machine can do. Consult the manual and try them out and get to know what your machine is capable of. That's it. It's our final tip, tip number 10. Find out what the different presser feet you have are for. The only ones that I ever use for dressmaking are number 1, your regular presser foot, number 2, a zip foot, number 3, an invisible zip foot, and number 4, an automatic buttonhole foot. Some of these feet will come with your machine, others you may have to order, and it will depend on your sewing machine whether you have a buttonhole foot that looks like this or a slightly different type. This one is for the Janome 525S and is a one-step buttonhole foot. If you've learnt something new today, please like this video. If you think you know someone who would enjoy it, please share and subscribe so you get to see my other videos as they are published. You can find out more about my membership club using the link below, which is full of loads of content to help make you a better dressmaker.